It is my honor, my privilege, and my great joy to introduce you to our speaker tonight, Reb Simcha Raphael. He is the founding director of the Da'at Institute for Death Awareness, Advocacy and Training. He works currently as a psychotherapist and spiritual director in Philadelphia and is on the faculty of the One Spirit Learning Alliance Art of Dying Institute. He was ordained as a rabbinic pastor. He is the author of the groundbreaking work, which is in my office and also in our library, Jewish Views of the Afterlife, and the co-editor of Jewish End-of-Life Care in a Virtual Age, Our Traditions Reimagined. Simcha is also a colleague, a friend of mine. We were in rabbinical school together for a couple of years, which was a treat to sit next to you and exchange snarky comments. So welcome, Simcha. So are you going to talk from down here, do you think, or up here?
Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos. Where would you like to be?
I'll stand here.
Okay.
Do we need to pass any more of the text?
Yeah, there's probably some people who haven't received, so I'll hand them
Did you
out.
get your party favor?
So raise your hand if you don't have a handout. Anyone not have one? Yeah. And for those on Zoom, you should be able to access that handout, Mel, and everyone through the website. Try the website calendar. Click on today's event on our calendar, and you should be able to pull it up. Anyone else need a handout? Okay.
So I want to thank Rabbi Kaya for the opportunity to be here. I really appreciate this invitation. And I want to thank you all for being here, because if you didn't show up, I'd actually have no reason for being here.
Can you turn up his mic a tiny bit? Go ahead.
So I've been teaching about Jewish views of the afterlife for decades at this point. And I was thinking about lots of different synagogues that I have gone to, sort of 50s brick building synagogues, sort of 1940s old schleppy and tired buildings. And there was something very special. There is something very special about being in this building. While we were davening, I had my eyes closed. I was imagining the cloppity-clop of horses and wagons going on the street when this first became a synagogue. There seems to be some feedback. And then I was thinking about how many times do you think they did Shema in this building? There is some feedback. How many times do you think they said Kaddish in this building? I don't know whether that's the mic or the ghosts, the ancestors. So that's, and then I walked up, when I go into to teach, I always go up to the yahrzeit boards to invite the ancestors. And some of the ones here are really, really unique. I haven't seen those elsewhere. So I want to say that's a good intro to talk to you about sort of how we remember our connection with ancestors and learn about what Judaism has to say about life after death. So how did I get around to doing this? I want to tell you a story. I'm originally from Montreal. Actually, when I was a kid, we would get on a train from Montreal to White River Junction. I spent 4 summers near Dartmouth in New Hampshire, summer camp. And when I was in my 20s, I had a friend. We had been friends in high school. We were friends in college. And we were together one night. He was from an Orthodox family. It was a Saturday evening. I was one of these hip Jewish guys. I was cooking dinner for my date, right? He helped me make the meal, and he said he was going to go visit his father after Shabbos. The date turned out to be okay, and in those years, I didn't have to go home, run home to send a babysitter. So we were on the streets of Montreal at 2:00 in the morning. And it was a full moon. And I pointed to the full moon. I said, there's something very auspicious about that full moon. I don't know what it is, but there's something very auspicious about that full moon. Took her home, went to sleep, and then about 5 in the morning, another friend of mine called, telling me that the friend I had been with earlier that evening had just been killed in a car accident. And if you would have said simply, you're going to spend many years of your life talking to people about death and afterlife, I would have said, that's not that wasn't what I imagined my life to be. But very early on, I felt a sense of his presence. The cemetery was called Mount Pleasant Memorial Park. I promise you there was nothing pleasant about burying a 22-year-old kid in the dead of a Canadian winter. But even at the cemetery, a few of us said, hey, didn't it feel like Les was here? We were sitting in the Shiva house one night, and it was like, didn't it feel like he was here with us? During the year, I had a dream. Actually, I've written about how the deceased appeared to us in dreams. He appeared to me. And when I began to ask that question, what does Judaism have to say about life after death? There was very little, if not absolutely nothing available. You know, I already had a degree in religious studies, so I knew about teachings on life after death in many of the religions of the world. But when I went to the Jewish sources, there was almost nothing. And a few years later, I met my teacher, Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi, of blessed memory, and he said, oh, afterlife. You want to learn about afterlife? Go here, here, and here. And he pointed me to sort of the pre-modern Jewish world. He pointed me to places in mysticism and Kabbalah and Zohar. We're going to do that tomorrow afternoon. And I spent 10 years or more reading everything I can get my hands on life after death. I wrote my psychology dissertation called Judaism's Contribution to the Psychology of Death and Dying. It was on life after death with application of work when dying and bereaved. Only in California in the 1980s could you write a psychology dissertation on afterlife. And what I pull my ears away from my mic, from my beard. Okay? How's my hair? So what I want to do is share with you tonight and tomorrow what I have discovered. And I want to say, what I want to do is really give you a kind of collage, certainly tonight, of what's in biblical and rabbinic tradition. Because it's very rich. And the question really I want to ask, I have the mic, so I get to ask the first question. What did you learn what Judaism has to say about life after death? I wish you could see yourself on camera. No, I wish we could pan over here. You don't get these looks. You have your back and these blank looks. These blank looks on you. Where did you learn it? Put up your hand, please. Oh, okay, just if I want to engage with you tonight. So when you speak louder. It was none of our business, right? It was God's business. Anyone else? Actually, we'll go to you. Hang on. Keep your text near you. Anyone else? I'm telling you, I'm looking at this room. I figure, with Rabbi Kaya as your rabbi, you got to be pretty sophisticated in your learning, and you'd think I'm asking you like, what's the secret to the nuclear atom or something like that? No? Okay, so you know what? Do Jews believe in life after death? You're not sure? Yes. That's about it. That's the whole sum total of what they taught you. Look at your text over here. Can you read, or should I get people to read? You want? So if you want to, then have the mic be passed, because people on Zoom won't hear them. How about if you just be my reader for tonight? Okay. You thought you were getting a night off.
It's fine.
So read just the first one.
Okay, modern responses, life and the living. Is that where you want me to start?
Yeah.
Judaism celebrates life and the living. It dwells on life here rather than on the hereafter, as other religious faiths do. Life is precious, the here and the now.
So put up your hand if that's sort of what they taught you in some way, shape, or form. Okay, so I have to tell you the following. It's true, but it's only half true. What's true is Judaism believes in life and the living. In Judaism, there was never a sense of the world beyond had primary of importance in this world. It's in this world that we do mitzvot. And when Mashiach, when the Messiah will come, it's not that we're going to go to some other supernal realm. We're going to build Mamlechet Kohanim v'Goy Kadosh, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. We're going to make this realm holy. But that doesn't mean that Jews don't believe in life after death. We sort of confounded the two in the modern period. In the pre-modern world, in the world of Isaac Bashevis Singer and the Hasidic masters, there was never, ever any question. In the world of your great-great-grandparents and mine, they didn't sit around saying, Chaim, to believe in the afterlife, I'm not so sure. Remember Fiddler on the Roof? That's an afterlife story. In that world, there was a sense of multiple levels of connection. So what happened? How come we lost it? Anyone? Any thoughts on that? I'll give you a hint. It begins with the word H. After Holocaust, nobody wants to talk about all the souls in the world beyond, that's for sure. That and what's that famous psychiatrist, Simcha Freud. After Simcha Freud, right? Nobody wants to talk. Freud said religion is a universal obsession on neurosis. He said human beings invented spirits and ghosts standing in front of dead bodies. So we inherited rationalism and scientific materialism, and we lost touch with it. So what we're going to do tonight and tomorrow is a kind of spiritual archaeology. We're going to time travel, and we're going to go back and we're going to look at what it is that our biblical ancestors and rabbinic scholars, and then tomorrow the Kabbalists and the Hasidim had to say about life after death. Okay, so that's sort of, there's another one. One last one, and then we'll get into our first text.
Okay, dead is dead. Quote, what lives on are the children and a legacy of good works, end quote.
Okay, so you heard that one?
Yeah.
Who wants to say, that's my belief? Who wants to put up your hand if you want to claim that? Okay. So here's what I have to say. You look very friendly. Usually there's somebody sitting in the front row when I do this stuff, has a big fat ring. I don't want to insult anybody. It gives me this dirty look. Like, I don't believe in any of that afterlife junk. Now you can talk. So to that person, I'll say it to you too, I'm not selling belief. Because if I say believe and you say I don't believe, we're in an adversarial relationship. After Shabbos, I will sell you my book, okay? But at least I want to come here this weekend as a scholar of Jewish text and at least show you that we do have a very rich legacy of life after death, but everybody has to do their own meaning making. I have to be careful. I don't want to start with four-letter words. So I have to. My Auntie Rose would say, everyone has their hour of death tattooed on their body. She'd say, mine's on my behind and I can't see it. I'd tell her, Auntie Rose, if you could see your tuchus from behind, you would drop dead. So we all have to confront the reality of mortality. And I'm not only teaching sort of intellectual texts, I'm really talking about what meaning making each of us make in the face of the human encounter with mortality. So I'm gonna throw texts. We'll swim in texts. We'll do a collage of biblical and rabbinic texts tonight, and ultimately each of you have to make your own meaning making around that. And we'll do questions and conversation that. Okay? Anyone comments, questions so far? Please. I think you should stand up when you
Right,
speak.
but then you have to repeat the question so people on
repeat the
Zoom can
question.
hear it.
I think the Jewish view of afterlife is really our emphasis on remembering our ancestors.
The comment was the Jewish view of afterlife is focused on remembering our ancestors. I would say that's certainly a piece of it. And we're actually very good at it. Or we're not, depending on how we've been influenced in some sense by American culture also. Please.
My understanding is that the soul lives on. Sometimes right after death, the soul is lost without its body, searching.
So he said the soul lives on, and sometimes the soul is lost. So you're cheating because you're reading my text for tomorrow. In the Zohar it says for 7 days the soul goes back and forth from the grave's former home.
I didn't read any of this.
No, okay. So So what it is there's lots of different pieces in there. So let me take you back to Jacob's deathbed scene. Okay, we'll read this text. You know, you come to services. Do you read the parsha about afterlife? Again, you have to look and see the confused looks on their face. You never taught them the parsha. Okay, so read this. This is from Parsha Vayechi. Vayechi is the last chapter of Genesis. Oh, you know what? That's when everybody goes to Florida, so that's why you didn't know this one. It's in December. Yeah, please.
Death of Jacob. Then Jacob gave them these instructions. I am about to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave in the field of Ephron the Hittite, the cave in the field of Machpelah near Mamre in Canaan, which Abraham bought as a burial place from Ephron the Hittite along with the field. There Abraham and his wife Sarah were buried. There Isaac and his wife Rebekah were buried, and there I buried Leah. The field and the cave in it were bought from the Hittites. Quote, when Jacob had finished giving instructions to his sons, he drew his feet up into the bed, breathed his last, and was gathered to his people.
What does this have to do with afterlife? So let's time travel, okay? If we go back to the ancient Near East, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they were basically Bedouins. They would travel together in a family clan. There was sort of the patriarch. We have to remember the matriarchs too, right? The matriarch, the children, the camels, the goats. And they lived in a kind of communal sense. It was very much what the old sociologists would call participation mystique, sort of like a mystical union of community. When they were alive, according to the Tanakh, it says a person was nefesh chaya, a living spirit. When they were dead, a person was nefesh met, a dead spirit. When they were alive, they were in the community. When Jacob died, he moved. He was gathered to his ancestors. And that's the term for death. It doesn't say Jacob died. Jacob was gathered to his ancestors. Solomon slept with his fathers, they say. So there's this whole sense in the biblical world that death is to return to a kind of mystical or invisible realm of the ancestors. Now, it's interesting because we don't think of, you read, Jacob was gathered to his ancestors, and now, we're finished the parsha, and now we can go have kiddush. Like we don't reflect on what that means. But they were dealing with dying and death, and in that world, there was a sense of almost like an underworld, actually. When Abraham buys the cave of Machpelah, and then Isaac is buried there, and Jacob says, "Make sure you bury me in Machpelah." Right? That Machpelah is where he had a deed for his burial plot. And it's interesting because in some of the archaeological finds from that era, they find holes in the caves. They were buried in caves. They were cave chambers where there were food stuff there. And this is not Canaanite archaeology. This is Israelite archaeology. There was a whole sense of they'd give them a little nosh for the journey. So is that a belief in afterlife? It's not an articulated distinction between body and soul like we think of, because that doesn't show up till much, much later. But there is almost this sort of a sense of some activity continues in the sacred ancestral realm of the family tomb. Anyone want to comment on is this a belief in afterlife? There's certain. It's not, you see, it's not the way, here's the problem. I'm jumping in. We think about afterlife through the filter of Renaissance Christianity. If I say heaven, you get all kinds of images. If I say hell, you get all kinds of images. That's Christian Renaissance art. That's not even medieval midrash. And so, we've kind of been inculcated that, and we say, well, we don't believe in any of that stuff, right? But at least to say it, to go back into the biblical time is to recognize that there's some sense of connection between this world and the world beyond. First text, comments, we're going to swim it. Now we're going to get some interesting one coming up. Okay, now I'm taking you around the year 1000 before the Common Era. King Saul is inaugurated as the first king of Israel. They made him king because he was tall. It was tall Saul, so he became the king. And when he died, when he was initiated by, he was ordained. He was wasn't not the word. He was
Coronated, maybe anointed.
no, but when they poured oil, they anointed. He was anointed. He was anointed by Samuel. And when Samuel dies, Saul was very, very upset. Okay, so this is the background, please.
Okay. Now Samuel was dead, and all Israel had mourned for him and buried him in his own town of Ramah. Saul had expelled the mediums, ha'ovot, and spiritists, ha'idonim, from the land.
From the word yada, to know.
To know, the knowers, yeah. The seers. The Philistines assembled and came and set up camp at Shunem, while Saul gathered all the Israelites and set up camp at Gilboa. When Saul saw the Philistine army, he was afraid. Terror filled his heart. He inquired of the Eternal One, but the Eternal One did not answer him by dreams or Urim or prophets. Saul then said to his attendants, "Find me a woman who is a medium, Eshet Balat Ov, so I may go and inquire of her." "There's one in Endor," they said. So Saul disguised himself, putting on other clothes, and at night he and 2 men went to the woman. Quote, "Consult a spirit for me," he said, "and bring up for me the one I name." But the woman said to him, "Surely you know what Saul has done. He has cut off the mediums and the spiritists, the seers, from the land. Why have you set a trap for my life to bring about my death?" Saul swore to her by the Eternal One, "As surely as the Eternal One lives, you will not be punished for this." Then the woman asked, "Whom shall I bring up for you?" "Bring up Samuel," he said. When the woman saw Samuel, she cried at the top of her voice and said to Saul, "Why have you deceived me? You are Saul." The king said to her, "Don't be afraid. What do you see?" The woman said, "I see a spirit coming up out of the ground." "What does he look like?" she asked. "An old man wearing a robe is coming up," she said. Saul knew it was Samuel, and he bowed down and prostrated himself, face to the ground. Samuel said to Saul, "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?"
Why have you disturbed me?
"I am in great distress." Saul said, "The Philistines are fighting against me, and God has turned away from me. He no longer answers me either by prophets or by dreams, so I have called on you to tell me what to do."
Okay, this is a biblical text. They didn't teach you this in Hebrew school, I bet. Right? So what's going on here? There's lots of pieces in here, but I want to unpack it with you. And anyone want to comment on what we just read? Well, Saul's a very complex character. But what's he doing here? He's calling 1-900 psychic. But there's a paradox in this. Look, let me give you a little background. There was this is the Witch of Endor story, okay? And Endor is one of the planets on Star Wars, so that it came. This is where it came from. So the Witch of Endor was not a solo practitioner. There was a whole guild, mostly of women, who were communicating with spirits of the world beyond. What was Saul wearing to go see her? He was in disguise. Why was he in disguise?
Because he had banned them from doing this.
This is driving me crazy. Either you can go see this, right, see the psychic, or you can't. He bans them. Why were they banned? And then he goes hidden. So that in itself is problematic, which is part of why access to afterlife is problematic for us today, because there's an ambivalence in biblical tradition towards communicating with the dead. Anyone want to comment on that? Just that alone. Saul goes in disguise to see this, consult with this witch of Endor, and he himself, we imagine he had signed the decree as the king. What's going on? You're shaking your head with, is it confusion or? Well, what does it tell us about that period of time? But let's go in with sort of the lens of sort of the word I use is a phenomenologist. Like, let's look at the phenomena that was going on in that era. Obviously, some people were communicating with these women psychics, or these women spiritual visionaries, if you will, and there was a rejection of it. Yeah, please. God isn't talking to me. Me and God aren't on the outs these days.
And the second choice, the Urim was not available.
The Urim and Tumim was an oracular device that the high priest would wear to be able to communicate with
God.
To get answers. Yeah. Actually, they didn't teach you that in Hebrew school either.
And his third choice would have been a prophet.
No, the third was prophecy or dreams. That in itself is very interesting, because there were all of these other oracular devices of communicating with the invisible worlds, and we've lost touch with that. Did you take a course on oracular communication and the Urim, how to use that?
Not in rabbinical school, no.
We need to reinstate that.
Probably Jill Hammer would teach it.
Yeah, right. Jill Hammer. I'm sorry, what? Well, you're assuming that there's a sense of priority. We don't know, but all we can say is that was going on in that world. And what I'm asking now, why was it problematic? Either you can go see 1-900 Psychic. It's just 2 blocks down the street over here, right? I'm sure there's one in this town.
We're going to pass the mics. So now we have one on each side. Can you use the mic?
Who's talking?
Barbara,
Well, there was a whole...
let her say it in there, so
Yeah.
Zoom, they can hear on Zoom.
The question was, does this have anything to do with, these are women? So I will, give her back the mic. You read the next text. I want number 4.
Okay. Reactions to spiritism, contact with the dead. Let no one be found among you who sacrifices his son or daughter in the fire, who practices divination or sorcery, interprets omens, engages in witchcraft or casts spells, or who is a medium or spiritist, or who consults the dead.
Okay. So this is Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is a late text. Basically, you're going to have to take my word for it, but I'm going to try to unpack it. The women who were communicating with the dead were also hanging out with the goddess. We tend to think at Sinai, it said, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one," and everybody sort of jumped into shape, and they got OU tattooed on their belly button, on their pupik, right? In fact, the traditions of communicating with the Earth Mother, goddess traditions that was going on in the whole ancient world at that point, and on the full moon, when they went out to the fields on Sukkot, they weren't just reading Torah texts. They were doing other kinds of earth magic out in the fields on the full moon. So that tradition continued for a while, and there's evidence that the women who were doing these oracular communications were also in the lineage of Asherah and the Hebrew goddess and that. So repression of communication with spirits also came along with that finally wiping out that connection with goddess, with Baal, with Asherah, and all of that. So they sort of threw the baby out with the bathwater. So that's why Saul had to go in disguise, because it was no longer kosher. It was going on, and it was made not kosher.
So that is
Microphone,
also
microphone.
I'm sorry, that seems to me that also seems to be a part of the creation of the religion as a patriarchy.
Well, a Kohanim, okay, priests. What's one thing that a Kohen cannot do?
Go in the cemetery.
Go into the cemetery. And where were they? I'm sure they were hanging out in the cemetery. In indigenous cultures, there wasn't a very sharp wall between the world of the living and the world of the dead. But somehow, with the emergence of patriarchy and Yud-He Vav-He's monotheism, the Protestant scholars call it the Yahwistic monotheism, with the emergence of the purging of non-monotheistic traditions, it cut off the connection with those other worlds. Again, we could do a whole thing because there's a lot more text around this. But as part of my collage, I want you to see that this was going on in the ancient world, and again, it's why why people have to go to the Tibetan Book of the Dead when there's this Jewish woman, and her mother is dying in Brooklyn Convalescent Hospital, and she wants to read her mother's selections from the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And Stephen Levine, who is sort of like a psychologist and spiritual teacher working with the dying, says, "Don't you dare, you're going to freak out your poor mother. She grew up on gefilte fish and chicken soup, and you start reading her about the flaming Haruka Buddhas, she's going to be more confused." He says, "Go read her Yiddish love poetry." Because we lost those traditions going back to biblical time and beyond. How we doing? You ready for another one?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the collage. Another term is the word Sheol. Have you heard the word Sheol? Mm-hmm. Is Sheol for good people, for bad people, for we're not sure?
It's down.
We'll read the first one.
Okay, the first one says Jacob, if any harm come to him, referring to Benjamin, on the journey you are to undertake, you would send me down to Sheol with my white head bowed in grief.
It was almost as if, they had these little family tombs, and then and originally there were a whole bunch of tribes, like the 13 colonies became a nation, or I think it did. We're not sure anymore. And the 12 tribes became the Israelite, and all of the different sort of family tombs became this underworld of Sheol. But when Jacob says, if Benjamin dies, I'm going to go to Sheol, does he allude to it as a realm of punishment? Samuel comes up from Sheol. So Sheol originally is sort of, they describe it as an amoral realm. It's not good or not bad. It's just that was where they go. There's nothing to do with heaven. If you went up to Abraham and you said, what are things like in heaven? He would say, What do you mean heaven? Up. There was no up at that point. It was all down. And then it becomes, I spent like a month and a half just reading texts on Sheol. And then it becomes, read the next text, please.
From Isaiah. Your magnificence has been flung down to Sheol, underneath a bed of maggots, and over you a blanket of worms.
Yeah, that's not all that appetizing. So it starts to become an underworld of punishment. But look, the biblical period, the text were written over 1,000 years. I can't give you a sketch of afterlife of 1,000 years of text. I can give you a couple of, I have an hors d'oeuvre bar over here, not quite a full meal. Tomorrow for Kabbalah, we'll get more of a full meal. Now, I'll tell you why we don't have so much clear stuff. We have allusions to it. The ancient Israelites weren't only concerned about the post-mortem fate of the individual person. Their focus wasn't necessarily what was going to happen to Joe and Jane Jew after they died. What were they interested in? They were interested in the collective fate of the Israelite nation. In fact, there's much more text on what will happen at the end of time to the Israelite nation than what will happen to the individual Jew. You know, we've been through the Renaissance and sort of 1960s humanistic psychology. So, you know, we're more interested in what's the fate of the individual, what's going to happen to my soul, you know, all that stuff. But that wasn't their question. Their question was what will happen to us as a people. So read this one, please.
And this is also from Isaiah. And it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh's house shall be established on top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all the nations shall flow unto it. And many people shall go and say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, so that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go for Torah, and the word of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh from Jerusalem.
So that was part of also the legacy of the biblical period. Again, what I'm just trying to show you is part of why we have trouble accessing some of this stuff is because their questions were not necessarily our questions. They had very different set of questions. But in a minute, I want to go from biblical to rabbinic text. But the book of Daniel changes the name of the game significantly. I started with Jacob, which the patriarchs could be dated. The settlement of the land is 12. The Exodus is 1250. The settlement of the land, and King Saul is ordained is anointed around 1000. All this stuff is 5th, 5th, 6th century. The book of Daniel is the last text of the Hebrew Bible. It's after or around the time the Jews are in Persia, which is Babylonia. And read this one. It changes the name of the game forever.
There shall be a time of trouble such as never was, since there was a nation till that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one who shall be found, written in the book. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt.
So here, Daniel, well, actually, before I comment, anybody, what's going on here?
Resurrection.
It's resurrection, which is a whole other topic of conversation. Yeah, please?
Bodily resurrection bodily resurrection and some people being rewarded and some people being punished, it seems like.
It's the first allusion to anything to do with two choices when you die. This is the first and only text in the biblical period where there's some sense of there's a realm for the righteous and a realm for the wicked. What I noticed in reading these texts is that something emerges at the end of a period, an era, and then that becomes normative and standard for the next era. Because when the curtain opens on the rabbinic period a few hundred years later, they're already talking about Gehenna and Gan Eden, about the punishment and reward. But that clearly comes from Daniel. So, and I'm going to say something about resurrection under the rabbinic period. But what I've given you was just a panorama of what's in the biblical period and why it's so complex for us today. I mean, I was crazy. I mean, at midnight, I would go to the Greek restaurant, the Greek cafes in Montreal, at midnight on Saturday night, drinking Turkish coffee and reading afterlife texts. What better way to spend this time? And so I really imbued this stuff completely. And if you want to do that, actually, this is a non-paid, non-political announcement. Read my book. During the year that my father-in-law died, my wife read my entire book a little bit every night. So I know there's at least 2 people in the world who have read that. But it really is a kind of compilation of all of these texts. And they're all, look what you see, they're all very different. But it still makes the point that we do have this tradition and that it's complex to access it. What I'm going to do tomorrow is show you that the Kabbalists make it a lot more simple. Okay, we're going to segue and then we're going to end with Kiddush. I don't know how much more time you have before you throw me out of here, but let's at least do a couple of rabbinic texts.
Okay.
Anyone, comments, questions? Please.
Can we use the mic so people can hear you on Zoom?
I have a question on the timing of the book of Daniel. You said it was the last book.
Yeah, it's about 3rd or 4th century BCE.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, which
You
one?
know, I think it's even later than that. I put here 2nd century BCE. I have to read my own notes sometimes because I forget. Okay. Please.
So if this comes in Daniel, why didn't it go mainstream? Why didn't people say, there's really a heaven and a hell?
Well, there's a whole period of literature here that I'm not doing called the Apocrypha and the Pseudepigrapha. That's sort of the texts that were written in Hellenistic period in Greek. In Hebrew got translated to Greek, and they didn't make the canon. But when the curtain opened, wait. Can I just do Command Z? Just not erase what I just said. There's a very simple answer to your question. The temple was destroyed. The temple was destroyed. Oh yeah, that little thing happened, right? So the truth of the matter is, that's exactly what happened. Okay, so there was the apocryphal and pseudepigraphal era, and there's a lot of stuff in there, and I have a whole chapter in the book on that. But what we call the rabbis, okay, initially were a bunch of guys, if we can say so, right, who had to deal with the fact that the temple was destroyed. Okay, they had to reboot Judaism after a period of crisis and trauma. You know, we're beginning to understand more the psychological impact of trauma. But if we were living in Jerusalem in 68 CE, of the Common Era, in 69, and then we were walking around the destroyed Jerusalem in 70 and 71, we would be walking zombies in trauma. And I think that changes the way people had to think about death and life after death. I don't think I've articulated that,
I would
no.
add something.
What?
Yeah, and I would add something.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, which is that when you said, who was that asked the question? Liz, yeah, that you said, but if it's in the Bible, if Daniel's in the Bible, but we don't study Daniel. Daniel's never taught. Daniel never, when the rabbinic tradition developed, they didn't really use the book of Daniel in the Talmud. And it never got, how we read from all of these different Megillot, all these different scrolls during the year from our canon, from the prophets and from Esther and Ruth and Lamentations and Ecclesiastes, so on and so on. We never read Daniel. The rabbis never had us do that, and it never became part of Jewish education. So it's there, but it's like this little hidden chunk.
Yeah, and
It's
it was
embedded.
apocryphal, not apocryphal, but apocalyptic. It was a sense of what
It is
will happen at
apocalyptic.
the end of time.
Yeah.
I think that's very interesting. Okay, so the curtain opens with the Mishnah. Mishnah is post-biblical Jewish law. The Mishnah was written in order to provide guidelines how to live a Jewish life once the temple was destroyed. Living in the era before the temple was destroyed, we had leadership, we had priesthood, we had guidelines for how you paid your income tax, right? You brought your first fruits, you came to the temple and you gave them your hat and your goat. I mean, it was all sort of built into the system. And you had the land. Once that was basically wiped out by the Romans in the year 70, Judaism had to reboot itself completely. So the Mishnah is the attempt to provide wisdom on how to live a Jewish life in this world. They couldn't afford to speculate so much about afterlife because they were basically dealing with some response to trauma. For 40 years after the Holocaust, nobody was talking about life after death. They were just talking about resettling refugees and creating safety for Jewish communities around the world. So the rabbinic period is born out of crisis, and the early rabbinic texts, anyways, and even a little, to some extent, the later ones in Babylonian are very much how you reboot Judaism without temple and without priesthood and without the land. And so the term that shows up for them is Olam Hazeh, this world, and Olam Haba, the world to come. And we're at the bottom of page 2, number 8.
Okay, from the Mishnah. Rabbi Jacob said, "This world, Olam Hazeh, is like a vestibule before the world to come, Olam Haba. Prepare yourself in the vestibule so that you may enter into the banquet hall."
What does that suggest? Olam Hazeh, this world,
Is preparation.
is preparation, right? And there's this Olam Haba.
For the real-
Now read the next text.
And further, he used to say, "Better is 1 hour of repentance and good works in this world, Olam Hazeh, than the whole life of the world to come, Olam Haba."
You just confused me.
Better is 1 hour of bliss in the world to come than the whole of life in this world.
Boy, now I'm really confused. Because, first, this is like, what a Zen koan is? This is like a Jew of a Zen koan.
Yeah.
Because there's a sense that this world and that world are in juxtaposition with each other, but it's not a sense of one has more primary importance than the other. It's a sense of we want to live fully in this world, and then there is an Olam Haba, but at that point, they're competing with Christianity in the ancient world. And they're really saying, yeah, there is Olam Haba, there is the world to come, but we have to do our mitzvot, and we have to fulfill God's will by living a moral, ethical life in this world. And that's since the rabbis were more ethicists than metaphysicians. I love these two because when when you read these, it's the same guy who says it. Yeah, please.
But is it the world to come in terms of like The afterlife or the world to come in terms of the Messianic age?
Okay, you have to read the next quote.
Okay.
Okay?
Oh.
This is, what, there was some teaching of Midrash is like, all of the teachings and even the question that one student will ask one day, it's all part of the canon of Jewish teachings. Yeah, please.
Not like
Okay.
this world will be the world to come. In this world, one has the trouble to harvest grapes and press them. But in the world to come, a person will bring a single grape in a wagon or a ship, store it in the corner of his house, and draw from it enough wine to fill a large flagon. There will not be a grape which will not yield 30 measures of wine.
So when is Olam Haba? At the end of time and history. That's almost like a time of super technology. But now read the next one.
My Torah will guide you in your path in this world. It will watch over you in your sleep at the hour of death. And when you awake, it will converse with you in Olam Haba.
When is Olam Haba at that point?
After death.
After death. So what it is that the term notion of Olam Haba, which I want to suggest we stop using, and you'll see in a second one, is fused and confused. Because sometimes it refers to a post-Messianic era, and sometimes it refers to a post-mortem era. Then, and I'm going to come in for a landing, and we're going to continue this conversation tomorrow. Nachmanides is a later mystic. He sort of he was having an email exchange with the rabbis. He was writing from the 12th century, and they were writing from the 2nd, 3rd century. He says, and I'm going to read this one, number 10. This is a new concept, but I want it to enter into your mental thinking. In any case, concerning the meaning of Olam Haba, the world to come, we have learned that it is a world in which the body, the sanctuary, meaning the temple, and its vessels will be present, meaning in the future time there'll be a rebuilding of the temple. It is not Olam HaNeshamot, the world of souls in which every person receives their due immediately after death. With the early Kabbalists, you get this notion of a new concept of Olam HaNeshamot, the world of souls that takes place after death. And it's not a well-used term, but for our contemporary thinking, that's actually a useful term. Olam Haba, more often than not, refers to the end of time and history, but Olam HaNeshamot refers to what happens after death. And the Kabbalists come in and they fill in all the details. And I want to be able to live and not end up being schmeiced right on the stage. So I better get off the stage now, and we will continue talking about Olam HaNeshamot, the world of souls, tomorrow. But before she shuts me up, watch your dreams tonight. Watch your dreams, because those beings, we're going to talk more about that tomorrow, are around and present for us.
Thank you, Simcha. Wonderful. Okay.
Shabbat Shalom.
Yeah.